My name is Riley Foster. I'm 29, and I always thought I understood the rhythm of my life, what I needed, who I was, the balance I maintained between work, love, and my small family. Yet, that Tuesday morning, even as I slipped into my favorite emerald blouse and a pleated skirt that swished just right around my knees, a storm I hadn't anticipated began quietly unfurling. Charles, my boyfriend, Charles Jones, leaned against the doorway of our kitchen, cradling his coffee cup like it was a lifeline. His gaze rested on me, measuring, critiquing, though he said nothing. The silence felt heavier than words. Our apartment smelled of coffee and warm laundry, the comforting scent of a life we'd built together, simple but ours. And in that apartment, our 9-year-old son, Leo, moved with the slow, careful grace of someone too observant for his age. He was smart, quiet, obsessed with soccer and Lego sets, and he had already learned to notice the tension in my shoulders before I did. I had picked him up late from aftercare, trapped in traffic behind a delivery truck that seemed to own the lane. By the time we arrived home, darkness had fallen, the city lights twinkling but indifferent outside our window. Leo dumped his backpack on the rug, fishing for homework, while I set water to boil for dinner. The apartment hummed quietly, a fragile normalcy. I opened my laptop to clear a few emails, just a little space to breathe. Then my phone buzzed. Mom. I let it ring. Then Avery. Then Mom again. I didn't answer, not yet. I wasn't ready for the storm that always seemed to arrive through their voices. And then, thanks to the Bluetooth speaker tucked in Leo's backpack, Avery's voice erupted across the kitchen like a trumpet I hadn't asked for. Hey, we went over the numbers. It's not going to work if people bring extra kids unless they're, helpful. You already sent the $5,600. Thank you, but we're bumping the gift budgets for the inner circle. Double it, or no extra kids after cocktail hour. That includes Leo. He's adorable, but we only have room for priorities. Don't make this hard. Love you. The words sat in the air, heavy and acrid. Leo froze mid-grate, cheese in hand, as if he'd suddenly realized the world had rules he hadn't been told. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were wide, vulnerable, practicing bravery in a kitchen that had never seemed so small. It's okay, Mom, he whispered. Just leave me with a nanny like last time. We didn't have a nanny, just Mrs. Ortega down the hall, a sweet older woman who accepted cash and tamales when I needed her. Leo's imagination filled in the gaps with the fairy tale version of care he thought families like Avery's might have. My hands shook as I killed the speaker. My son, 9 years old, had tried to reassure me, comfort me about being priced out of his own aunt's wedding. I bent down, kissed the top of his head, and said softly, "You didn't do anything wrong." He nodded, small and quiet, like a little shadow. That night, as I tracked missed calls piling up on my phone, I realized something fundamental. My family had always leaned on me for stability, for money, for solutions. I had been the reliable one, the steady one, the person who never said no. I remembered the countless times that reliable had been twisted into leverage. When Leo was just a baby, I had skipped vacations so Avery could chase internships. At 22, I'd covered my father's medical deductible without complaint. At 25, I had co-signed for Avery's LA apartment when she chased a marketing job that didn't exist. Family was family, my mother would say, as if that phrase alone excused my exhaustion. But exhaustion was no longer enough. That voicemail, echoing through my kitchen, made it impossible to ignore the truth. I had been useful, yes, but never fully seen, never fully considered. My devotion had been measured against a ledger of expectation and obligation. I sank into the kitchen chair, letting the weight settle. Outside, the city carried on, oblivious. Inside, I began cataloging the pattern, moments that had seemed small at the time but now shimmered like warning lights. The time I bought the bulk of food for a baby shower, the countless rides to practices, the three-way split of my holiday bonus leaving my accounts bare in January, the silent expectation that I would always pay first, give first, sacrifice first. Leo watched me, unknowing but attentive, offering water or reminders about soccer hydration, small gestures that felt almost like prayers. I drank the water, though it did little to soothe the ache in my chest. The phrase, double the gift budget or no kids, echoed again, sharper this time, like a warning I had finally seen. I realized then, the wedding wasn't just a celebration with a budget problem. The wedding was a budget with a celebration problem. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel the anger and fear I had trained to suppress. I kissed Leo's forehead, tucked him into bed, and stared at the faint glow of the city through our window. For the first time, I understood that saying yes had cost me more than I realized, and that tonight I would begin to reclaim the power to say no. The storm had arrived quietly, yes, but it was no longer silent. In the quiet aftermath of that voicemail, I found myself remembering everything. Every time my family had leaned on me, I had delivered, not because I wanted to, but because I had been trained to. Useful, reliable, indispensable. Those words had been my armor and my cage. At 18, I had covered my father's airline change fee because he trusted me to handle it. At 20, I had split my small bonus 3 ways to cover extra expenses that Avery had conveniently forgotten to mention. At 22, I had written a check for my mother's property taxes when she insisted there was no other way. Each act was framed as a favor, an expression of love, but each left me feeling increasingly hollow. And now the ledger had a new line: double the gift budget, or no kids. I sat at our kitchen table that evening, Leo at my side, building Lego towers that leaned precariously, as if they, too, knew the balance of tension in the room. I began listing everything in my head: the payments, the favors, the silent sacrifices. It was as if my life had been reduced to columns of numbers and expectation. But this time I felt something new: clarity. Avery's text had arrived over the past few weeks, each polite, each edged with subtle coercion. "We need the grazing table, just until the vendors confirm. Can you front the photographer's retainer? You're the only one who says yes at the last minute. Family contributions, please. You're our rock." Even my mother had leaned in, softening her requests with phrases like, "It's just for fairness, sweetheart," or, "You know how it is, honey. Some families cover more." My father, as usual, had remained silent, forwarding emails with, "Can you handle this?" in the subject line, like a passive accomplice. I thought about Leo watching me, noticing the way my shoulders tensed, how I skipped dessert at the park because we have popsicles at home, how I stared at my laptop at midnight, counting balances that never seemed to add up. He didn't know the numbers, but he felt the stress. And when he brought me a glass of water with a small, "Coach says hydration stops cramps," I realized he was offering his own form of care, mimicking the lessons I hadn't even consciously taught him. Then came the moment that broke the surface entirely. The Bluetooth speaker in Leo's backpack replayed Avery's voicemail, the words echoing across the apartment, sharp and unforgiving. "Double the gift budget or no extra kids. He's adorable, but we only have room for priorities." I had killed the speaker, but the words lingered, searing themselves into my consciousness. I felt my hands shake, a tremor of rage and recognition. For the first time, I saw the pattern in full: a life structured around my obedience, my financial reliability, my willingness to suppress myself to keep the family machine running. I remembered the baby shower 3 years ago, when the RSVP count exploded and I had purchased the bulk of the food. Avery had joked about crowdsourcing motherhood, and everyone laughed. I had laughed too, but the ledger in my mind had logged it as yet another obligation. I remembered Christmas when I split my bonus 3 ways, leaving myself nearly empty. Mom's text had arrived days later. "Do you have any wiggle room for property taxes?" And I had shrugged, trained to confuse being useful with being loved. I told myself ledgers equaled control. The truth was harsher. They just made the story neat while it devoured me from the inside out. In the days that followed, I began saying no in small ways. No to the champagne truck, no to upgrading chairs, because wood read richer than resin. Each refusal was cataloged in my head, labeled difficult by my family's expectations. Avery would ask, "Why are you making this so hard?" And I would think, "Because the numbers don't work. Because Leo is not a bargaining chip. Because I am tired." I started to understand that every polite request from my family was an invisible leash. Every thank you hid leverage. Every smile masked obligation. And yet, even as I cataloged the pattern, my anger simmered quietly beneath exhaustion. I had not yet confronted them, but I was preparing. I knew a confrontation was coming. The ledger was no longer invisible. The pattern was undeniable. Leo, ever perceptive, watched my quiet reckoning. I saw the way his small hands fiddled with Lego bricks, how he mimicked the structures he built as if he were trying to make sense of the chaos he didn't yet understand. I wanted to tell him, "It's not you. You are never a transaction." But I only held him close, letting him feel that I was present, that he was safe. The voicemail had exposed everything, and it had also offered clarity. I realized that the wedding, all of Avery's needs, and every family favor demanded of me were not small inconveniences. They were a pattern of control, and tonight, for the first time in years, I felt the desire to resist, not angrily, not with shouting, but quietly, with unshakable resolve. I made a promise to myself as I tucked Leo into bed. I will not let them make him small. I will not let them make me small. For the first time in a long time, I slept with a sense of purpose, a quiet, simmering determination that I had a right to say no, that I had a right to boundaries. The storm had begun quietly in a voicemail, but it was only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight fell across our small kitchen like a promise. I made coffee and packed Leo's lunch, moving with the ordinary rhythm that had become armor against the world. But inside, I was anything but ordinary. Every nerve was alert, every thought sharpened by the clarity that had arrived in the wake of Avery's voicemail. Leo sat at the table, his small hands wrapped around a cup of chocolate milk. He glanced up at me and said, "Mom, you're not mad at me, right?" I smiled, the first honest one in days. "Never, Leo. You're perfect, just as you are." He nodded, satisfied, and I felt the weight of responsibility I had carried alone for so long settle differently now. This time, I would carry it consciously, on my terms. By mid-morning, I drafted the messages I had rehearsed in my mind. Calm, clear, non-negotiable. Each word was measured, precise, carrying the quiet power I had learned in the weeks of reflection. From me to Avery. From now on, attendance for both myself and Leo will be based on the original invitation terms. I will not make additional contributions. To my mother, please do not override these boundaries or contact me about this again. Boundaries are not disrespect, they are necessary. To the wedding planner, remove me from all vendor communication. Any questions about payments must be in writing. I paused, reading each line. Each word felt like a brick in a wall I had finally built around myself. A wall that didn't isolate me, but protected me from being used as leverage. Sending the messages felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. The phone buzzed almost immediately. Missed calls from my mother, Avery, the planner, but I ignored them. This was not a moment for negotiation. By lunchtime, the city outside had continued in its indifferent rhythm. I watched people pass by the window, unaware of the battles that raged inside small apartments, inside small families, inside small hearts. Then came the confrontation. Avery, flanked by my mother, arrived at our door unannounced. Her eyes were wide, searching for the version of me that would apologize, that would crumble, that would accept her logic without question. But that Riley no longer existed. "Riley, we just want to talk," Avery began, her voice edged with the practiced calm of someone used to getting their way. "We are talking," I replied, my tone quiet but unwavering. "You just haven't been listening." The kitchen, once a place of warmth and safety, felt like a courtroom. Every glance, every gesture carried weight. Leo watched from the living room doorway, silent but attentive, sensing the tension like a sixth sense. Avery attempted to charm, to coax, to justify her demands, listing every addition, every necessity for the wedding. Each phrase, polished and precise, was meant to soften the blow, to make me feel guilty, to make Leo negotiable. I remained still, calm. Each word in my mind was a boundary reinforced, a principle upheld. I will not let them make my son small. I will not let them make me small. Finally, I pressed play on the voicemail, the words filling the room like a spotlight on truth. "Double the gift budget or no extra kids. He's adorable, but we only have room for priorities." Avery's face flushed. My mother's hand moved instinctively to her mouth. The planner, present in the background, paused, uncertain. The power that had always been skewed in their favor shifted, quietly but decisively. "Payments, promises, the rule that the more you give, the more human you're allowed to be," I said, voice steady. "Leo is not a bargaining chip. I am not a ledger entry. The last money I sent is the last money I will send. If these terms change, we leave. That is non-negotiable." The room held its breath. For a moment, it seemed as though time had stopped, waiting for someone, anyone, to break the silence. But I remained unwavering. Avery tried one last tactic, a soft plea, a tearful attempt at guilt. But Leo's small hand slipped into mine, grounding me, reminding me why I fought. He's here. He's mine, and I will protect him. At that moment, something shifted. My mother exhaled, a quiet acknowledgement of a boundary she could no longer ignore. Avery looked at me, really looked, and for the first time I saw hesitation, uncertainty, the faint recognition that her demands had gone too far. I turned to Leo. His eyes, wide and shining, were full of trust and admiration. I kissed the top of his head and whispered, "We're okay, we're safe." For the first time in years, I felt the raw, unfiltered power of saying no, not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of love for myself and for Leo. The storm had arrived quietly in a voicemail, but it had been met with a calm, unshakable resolve that neither family expectation nor tradition could breach. And as Avery left, her shoulders slumped, I knew the balance had shifted. We had faced the pressure, the leverage, and the subtle tyranny of expectation and emerged intact. Leo smiled up at me, small but victorious. "Mom, are we winning?" he asked. I held him close and whispered, "Yes, Leo, we are." The day after the confrontation, the apartment felt different. Quiet, yes, but no longer heavy. Leo moved through the space with his usual energy, but his small smiles carried a new lightness. He had sensed the shift, understood it in ways words could not capture. And I, Riley Foster, 29, single mom, survivor of subtle family tyranny, felt it too. The slow, steady pulse of autonomy returning to my veins. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the morning sun casting soft patterns across the counter. My phone buzzed. A string of messages from Avery, my mother, and even the wedding planner. But now they were not commands or guilt trips. They were responses, tentative and cautious, to the boundary I had set. Avery's first message read simply, "I understand. We'll follow the original terms. Sorry for pushing." No theatrics, no manipulation, just acknowledgement. My mother's followed, softer than ever. "I see your point. I'll step back. You don't have to explain yourself further." Even the planner, professional and composed, sent a short confirmation. "Noted. All vendor communication for Riley Foster and Leo removed." I exhaled, a sound I hadn't realized I'd been holding in for years. It was a quiet victory, not flashy, not dramatic, but powerful in its steadiness. The ledger in my mind had finally balanced, not with numbers, but with respect. Leo bounded into the kitchen, his soccer cleats clacking against the floor. "Mom, can we practice the tie again? I want to be ready." I smiled, letting him tie and untie, practice and correct, feeling the ordinary rituals that once felt burdensome now carrying a sense of joy and safety. Joy and... Later, as we walked through the neighborhood, I noticed the small details that had previously escaped me. The way sunlight touched the brick walls, the rhythmic hum of distant traffic, the way Leo's laughter bounced against empty streets. Life moved forward, indifferent to past injustices, and yet infinitely more tender when we reclaimed our agency. The wedding arrived like a calm storm. Leo wore his navy blazer, practiced serious faces, and a clip-on bow tie that leaned slightly crooked, his personal touch. I chose a simple, tailored suit that felt like a return to myself, a reminder that I had space in the world, not just as a mother, but as a person with needs, with authority, with a right to boundaries. At the venue, Avery looked radiant, but I no longer measured my worth against her demands or expectations. Ben, her fiancé, offered a polite smile of gratitude. Something unspoken passed between us, acknowledgement of my firmness, respect for my limits. Children ran freely across the lawn during cocktail hour, laughter mingling with music. Candles stood tall, unmolested, and no crisis emerged. Leo practiced serious and smiling faces, perfecting each turn, each pause. I watched him, letting the small, ordinary moments sink in, the reassurance of safety, the joy of being seen, the power of being valued for oneself. Later, when dinner was served, I noticed subtle exchanges between family members. Avery approached Leo, crouched to his height, and said softly, "You're the best-dressed guest I've seen today." Her words were small but genuine, without manipulation. She had learned, at last, that his presence wasn't negotiable, that love wasn't something you earned through budget or favor. My mother, standing nearby, nodded slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of the boundary I had held. I didn't need praise. The recognition in her posture, the absence of intrusion, was enough. That night, back in our apartment, Leo climbed into my lap. His hair smelled faintly of grass and dinner, his eyes bright with the wonder of a day fully his own. "Mom, are we still winning?" I held him close, the warmth of his body against mine grounding me. "Yes, Leo, we are, and we'll keep winning every day we stand for ourselves." I thought about the ledger, once filled with debts and obligations, and realized it had transformed. No longer a tally of favors extracted, it was a reminder of what I had learned, that saying no is not unkind, that boundaries protect love rather than diminish it, and that the quiet assertion of self is often the most powerful act of all. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, but inside, we had found our peace. Life was still full of small crises and responsibilities, but now they existed within the framework I had chosen. I could meet them without sacrifice of self, without surrendering Leo's well-being, without being complicit in manipulations disguised as gratitude. And in that quiet, reclaimed space, I realized the most profound truth. Boundaries do not break families. They strengthen them. Respect does not divide. It preserves. And love, unbound by ledger or leverage, becomes something unshakable. For the first time in years, I slept fully, completely, knowing we were not just surviving, we were thriving. The weeks after the wedding were quieter than I had anticipated, but quieter in a way that felt alive rather than empty. The tension that had followed me for years, the unspoken expectations, the debts of gratitude, the invisible ledger that counted my worth, had softened into something manageable. Leo and I had settled into a rhythm that honored our boundaries, and the city outside moved at its usual relentless pace, unaware that a small victory had taken place in a tiny apartment. Leo had taken to recounting the wedding in precise detail almost daily. "Mom, remember when the toddlers ran through the fountain and nobody cried? That was epic." I laughed, letting him relive the moments, understanding that for him, the victory was simple: freedom to exist, to play, to be seen without calculation. I spent quiet evenings with the ledger that had once haunted me, but now it was no longer a record of debt or obligation. It was a diary of lessons learned, a map of boundaries set, a reminder that I had the right to stand firm and protect my son. Every entry told a story of saying no, of asserting self, of honoring love without being coerced. Then came the conversations I had avoided for years, the subtle recalibration of family dynamics. My mother, quieter now, asked about our lives without judgment or instruction. "How are you two doing?" she asked one evening over tea. I gave a measured smile. "Better. We're learning to breathe." She nodded, a small, understanding gesture, and left it at that. No further questions, no silent expectations, just acknowledgement. Avery, in contrast, reached out tentatively. Her messages no longer carried the weight of demands, but curiosity and reconciliation. "Leo's tie looked perfect. You did well." I replied simply, "He was perfect, and so were we." No embellishment, no apology, no negotiation, just truth. Even Ben, her fiancé, seemed to carry a quieter respect. During a chance meeting at a cafe, he offered a nod and a smile, subtle acknowledgement that the balance had shifted and that my firmness had carved a space that could not be ignored or overridden. At home, Leo and I developed small rituals that anchored us. Saturday mornings became our time. Pancakes and soccer practice, Lego builds, and library trips. Even the ordinary felt extraordinary when the shadow of manipulation and expectation had lifted. Each ordinary moment was a reminder that life could be simple, safe, joyful. I took time to reflect on my own growth. Riley Foster, 29, had survived decades of being the reliable one, the invisible ledger keeper, the silent absorber of family chaos. I had learned that being dependable did not mean being exploitable, and that saying no was not unkind. It was necessary. For the first time, I could measure my worth by my own terms, not by the family's arbitrary scales. One evening, Leo fell asleep on the couch with a book open on his chest. I watched him, quiet and small, the soft hum of the fridge in the background. I traced a finger through his hair, the familiar scent of home surrounding us. In that moment, I understood that the battles we had fought, the voicemails, the boundaries, the silent resistances, had forged something more than relief, autonomy, safety, and trust. I whispered to the empty room, "We did it, Leo. We really did it." And he mumbled in his sleep, "We're winning, Mom." Yes, we were winning. Not because the world had changed, not because family had fully understood, but because we had claimed our space, our voice, our right to exist without negotiation. And in that claim, we had found freedom, the most profound kind, the freedom to live without compromise, to love without conditions, and to thrive without apology. The city continued its endless hum, indifferent and constant. And yet, inside our small apartment, life had shifted. The ledger would always exist in memory, a cautionary tale and a record of strength. But now it was balanced by something infinitely more important: boundaries, love, and the unshakable certainty that Leo and I were safe, valued, and, finally, free. And in that quiet certainty, I found my new beginning.